So we started this course with the cave allegory, right? So no irony that I have this on. The idea is that education is supposed to bring us to an enlightenment. And enlightenment is taking us outside of the cave. And once outside of the cave, we then try to share that information or newfound sense of value with the people that are still in the cave, but all they recognize is us as a shadow, and they don't understand our point. If you read the actual allegory of the cave, they try to kill him, right? So I think it was George Orwell said that when truth is suppressed, anybody who speaks the truth will be, that person will be the one that the community will be outraged over, okay? Then after that, we talked about just something, I think I called it like a reflective state or a sense of discovery, right? And we all have these opportunities to discover something. It's an aha moment for us. We talked about modern understanding of tolerance, which is acceptance, compared to the genuine tolerance, which is I realize that this evil exists around me and I will bear it, but I do not accept it. You guys did the genuine goods, counterfeit goods. We'll go over that tomorrow. And then today we're going to talk about the culture of life and culture of death. This is very conceptual. You know, if for somebody that likes definitive things, this doesn't always work. I mean, it doesn't always satisfy. Anybody who studies culture, it's a very interdisciplinary field, right? So we're bringing together theology, philosophy, and psychology here, trying to say, if you've ever asked yourself the question, how did we get like this, right? This is the world we live in. Right now, it's pretty divided, right? We understand that. But beyond the divisions that we have now, it's also hard to communicate. But how did things get like this? This is what we're going to look at in a very general way. We can't get into specifics. You could probably do an entire course on this. We're just going to go over it in one lesson, just to kind of give you an understanding of, you know, why is it so hard for people to accept principles of morality? You know, why is it so difficult? All right, let's leave it at that and just get started. Now what I'll do is I'll put up a phrase or a word, I'll give you an understanding of it, show you the connections between them, and then how this all leads to the culture of death or life. So first, the logical progression. In other words, when I say the culture of death, which I'll define at the end of this slide, how do you get to that? How do we get to this point? What are the elements that contribute to what we will call the culture of death? The first thing is skepticism. Skepticism, generally speaking, is nothing can be known with certainty. Now, nobody comes out and claims to be a skeptic. Some people do. And we're not talking about the skepticism where you should have a good, healthy skepticism towards something that sounds odd, right? Like, you know, you can't always trust what you have in the news, so be skeptical about what you hear. But that's not what we're talking about. That's more of a discernment. You know, how do I determine whether or not what I'm hearing is valid? That's not what we're talking about necessarily. Here we're talking about, do you really and truly believe that something can be known with certainty? Or are you unsure? Nobody will call themselves a skeptic. They'll talk more in terms of, look, you know, I'm born here in the United States, so I grew up Christian, I grew up Catholic. But, you know, if I was born in another part of the world, I might have never heard about God. And it's not like they're going to hell. So I'm not quite sure who's right, us or them. I'm not quite sure that, you know, you can really know. That's skepticism. That you don't really say you can know the truth. This, by the way, will lead somewhere. It will lead to moral relativism. If you really can't know what is or is not true, you're not going to be able to make judgments. If you can't make judgments, it's because you think there is no objective truth. We're all morally autonomous. It's almost like your conscience is okay for you and my conscience is okay for me. It doesn't bother my conscience. Hey, you have your beliefs, keep them to yourself, and I'll have my beliefs. Okay, so nobody walks around and says, I'm a moral relativist. It's how they approach the world, okay? I'll keep what I believe to be true, and you keep what you believe to be true. But it's not just that. It goes beyond that. It's almost as if because you don't believe you can know anything for certainty, you're not going to have an objective truth. All this stuff appears in our culture. Because you cannot know something with certainty, because there is no objective truth, the best we can do is you keep your individual judgments. And I'll have my individual judgments. And I'd like you to accept the fact that I have a differing opinion than you. Even if it is on an eternal truth. I want you to accept that. That's modern tolerance. Now, again, nobody walks around saying, you know, I just think we should accept what everybody says. But it's how we talk, okay? So, for instance, we will get into the marriage debate. If two men can get married, and they say it does not change marriage, and we say no, marriage is only between two people, a male and a female, and if I don't agree that both of those are acceptable, then I'm, by the world, said to be intolerant. But they both cannot be called marriage. That's just logic. And again, I'll use other people besides Catholics to show you that, all right? But the modern world says we all have to just accept each other like that. And really, can we really say what is or is not objectively marriage? I mean, really? Can you know with certainty that there is something that's marriage? All of this adds to this, right? We're conditioned in a way that we don't realize it. So to be a cultural critic is you have to step away from culture and you have to start saying, how did we get to this point? Now, there has never been a golden age, ever. There's no way or any time will you ever hear me say, we got to get back to the time when this, it was like this or this happened or that happened. There was no time like that, all right? I am not of some evangelical Christians and fundamentalists think we live in the end times, all right? I don't agree with that whatsoever. Maybe it's the end times, maybe it's not. This is certainly not the worst time that we've ever lived in, and it's certainly not the best time. So we're not here criticizing us, comparing us to another time when it was so good and we only got back to that. We're trying to say, what is going on here? How did we get to that point? If you ask big questions like that, then you'll understand this, okay? If those questions aren't important to you because all you're concerning about is getting the next thing, getting to, you know, to college, and in college to, you know, to your particular job, and the job to the family, and all these things seem like unimportant questions, then you wind up on what we call the treadmill of life. You never stop to be reflective enough to say, you know, what is going on? Okay, how did we get to this point? So, skepticism, moral relativism, modern tolerance. Now, there are things, and I'll call these the fruits, okay, of these three things. One is, it leaves us in a depressed state. Now, I'll tell you what I mean by depressed state, but I want you to make sure you get the flow of what I'm saying here. That's why I use the arrows. If you are skeptical about knowing something certainly, if you are a relativist in the sense that we cannot say there's objective truth, and if you say the best we can do is try to accept each other because that's the kind of nice thing to do, there are going to be fruits from this. One is a depressed state, and I'm not talking about some psychological clinical depression. I'm talking about a personal and cultural malaise. Does anybody know what malaise is? Can somebody look it up? You know, look it up somewhere. I don't care what it is. I want you guys to learn the word malaise because it really speaks to how we are as a culture. Come on, nerds. What's that?
That's
M-A-L-A-I-S-E. Go ahead.
General feeling of discomfort, illness, or uneasiness.
A general discomfort and uneasiness. Would you say that that kind of speaks to where we are at as a people here in the United States? A general discomfort and uneasiness? It's not just an uncertainty, right? It's a fruit of this. So you wind up in a depressed state. You also wind up in Bracism that's called nihilism, right? Nihilism says there's really no meaning to our existence. And if you think about it, you're born, you grow up, you get a job, you get a family, people get sick, you get die in the end. What difference did I make? Is there any meaning to life, right? Some people struggle with this. Even some young people claim to be nihilists. I think it's a little young to be shooting that word around, right? But we struggle to find meaning. So just ask yourself, if I'm being too overgeneral, if I say that we have this general discomfort, right? And then we have a sense that there's really no meaning to what we personally are doing in our lives and in our world. Confusion. Now, by confusion, I don't mean like just like in the general sense that we are confused, but there's no coherent notion of truth. There is, what I mean by confusion is we have no coherent notion of truth. So ask yourself, do we live in that general state of uneasiness where we struggle to find meaning in our lives? In the end, what did that life matter? When somebody died, what did that do to change the world? Do we really believe it's a coherent notion of truth? All of these, and these are just three, are the fruits of a skeptic, moral relativist who says the best we can do is accept people next to us, all right? All of that then leads, and I'm going to give you the definition, to what we call in the Catholic faith as the culture of death or cultural death. It doesn't matter. The culture of death, okay? And I'll give you a definition of the culture of death, and I know it's wordy, but I'll go slow and I'll repeat. It's the attraction of sin that permits. It is the attraction of sin that permits. And or promotes the devaluing. And or promotes the devaluing and or destruction of life, and or destruction of life, and its natural origins in God. The attraction to sin that permits and or promotes the devaluing and or destruction of life and its natural origins in God. So, what the culture of death, it was coined, and I'm not requiring you to remember this. It was coined by John Paul II in 1993 in his document Evangelium Vitae, okay? But this goes back, and I'm going to show you, this goes back to the 1st century AD. There's nothing new here, all right? So what happens is there are certain things in the culture, in our lives, that we get attracted to in terms of sin. And because we are attracted to those things, they promote and devalue those things that are necessary for a full and abundant life. So we wind up, and I'll show you the opposite of this, we wind up being in this state of malaise. We find no meaning with no coherent notion of truth. And it's really like being in quicksand. We're not quite sure how do we get out of this, right? All right. This is from 70 AD, from a document called the Teaching. I mean, if you think that this is just something that's occurring now, this ought to put that to rest. The way of death is this. First of all, it is evil and cursed, full of murderers, adulterers, lust, fornication, theft, idolatry, magical arts, witchcraft, robberies, false testimonies, hypocrisy, deceit, arrogance, depravity, self-will, greed, filthy talk, jealous, overconfidence, false pride, boastful. Persecutors of all things good. They hate the truth. They love lies. They're ignorant of the reward for righteousness. They do not cling to the good, nor righteous judgment. They are rather drawn to evil. Gentleness and endurance they distance themselves from. They love vanities. They chase temporary rewards. That's things here on earth. They have no mercy to the poor. They don't work for the afflicted. They don't know the Creator. Murderers of children. Is legalized abortion? Has there ever been anything that was worse than that? Destroyers of creation. Turning away from the needy, the oppressed, the afflicted, and so on, right? In favor of the rich and against the poor. Okay. That's from 70 AD. But there's a way out. Search and rescue, baby. Go in the cave and get them. So remember, you need to be drug out of the cave. And by the way, again, to read the whole story, that person, when he went back to tell his friends about the world that he saw, they tried to kill him. People hate the truth. Okay? We believe that eternal things can be known with certainty. We believe that. And by eternal things, I'm really talking about beauty, truth, and goodness. The things that transcend the human person: justice, mercy, liberty, these types of things. We know these things. We call knowing those things with certainty a justified true belief. If you think that because science has the ability, which it does, to know things empirically by what? Hypothesizing and then testing it, right? You might say, well, that's the only way we can know things with certainty. The greatest and highest things in your life, you'll never be able to test like that. You'll never be able to test your love for the future person you're going to marry, or for your children, your future children, or for the love of your country. Nor will you ever test somebody's ability to lay down their life for somebody else. So as beneficial as those things are, right, let's remember the limits of them. And has anybody seen the Dead Poet Society? If you have, you need to watch that. It's a wonderful movie with Robin Williams. So at one point, because he's teaching English to this all-boys school, and sometimes they don't get the purpose of it. Why are we learning about this stuff? He's teaching them to not read poetry like the back of a cereal box, but read with passion. And if they don't understand why, he tells them, look, doctors, lawyers, engineers, these are all noble professions and necessary for the flourishing of life. But he says, in the end, that's not why we're here. Beauty, truth, goodness, literature, art, that's why we live. So building bridges and saving people are good, noble things, but those are not why we are here, right? So the greatest and most deepest things in our lives, we will never know empirically. Justified true belief is the best we're going to be able to do. Okay? I could say my wife loves me. I could make sense of that to you. I can give you a good reasoning for it. I can't put it on a scale and weigh it. We also believe that truth and goodness are objective things. All right? It's not your truth and my truth, or your goodness and my goodness. They are something that in and of themselves are good. As a matter of fact, from a Christian standpoint, it's a person. Christ said, I am the way, the truth, and the life. Think about that. Resurrection is a person. We call that moral certainty, right? We can't do any better than the judgment we make than to have moral certainty. That may not be enough for science, but once again, this is not science. Let's not use the wrong scale to measure this. So justified true belief and moral certainty. And the third one is that we do recognize that evil exists in the world. Only a fool would not. But we will not accept it. And I use Martin Luther King Jr. as the example. He realized to the level of discrimination and racism. He accepted it never. So as opposed to the other so-called culture of death criteria that I gave you, skepticism, moral relativism, and modern tolerance, now we're saying in its place, justified true belief, moral certainty, and genuine tolerance. This produces something entirely different in a culture, all right? So this is what we're working towards. Which is why, by the way, if you're taking the journal at the beginning of these classes seriously, the whole purpose of it is to transform you. Because we can come up with all the social programs we want. We can get whatever political party we think is going to make the best change in, and all of it is rather meaningless if we, as a people, aren't changing ourselves, okay? So these three things will bear different fruits. First of all, it bears peace. Now, this is not all of us living in total harmony, okay? Let's not be utopian. What I mean by peace here is our hearts and soul can find consolation. Even in the middle of turmoil, our hearts and souls can find consolation. You guys hopefully will have a long life. You will go through cycles in the political, if anybody thinks, if your particular candidate is not in power right now, just stay around. It will be. This changes all the time. when Barack Obama first got elected, everybody was saying that's the end of the Republican Party. Now look at it. And before Barack Obama, when George Bush got elected twice, that's the end of the Democratic Party. And then along came Barack Obama. And before George W. Bush was Bill Clinton. When Bill Clinton came in, that's the end of the Republican. I mean, this stuff cycles, right? So we're after something entirely different. Our hopes are not in political parties. Our hopes are in personal transformation, so we should have peace. There should be a consolation of our hearts and our souls. It doesn't matter what you are in the midst of, right? If you want real peace, just don't turn on the news. Also, hope. Now, hope is a firm belief in a future possible good. Hope is a firm belief in a future possible good. But rather than depressed, we have peace. Rather than believing there's no point to existence, we have hope. And you can have this hope regardless of what your situation is. It doesn't matter how bad things are. Because our hope is ultimately in a person, right? Jesus Christ. Firm belief in a future possible good. And it also brings happiness. But happiness is not whatever makes you happy, okay? Like, let me say it this way. Let me tell you what it is not. Happiness is not subjective contentment. I'd be happy if I can go to the movies this weekend. I'd be happy if I got an A on this. I'd be happy if I ask her out, she says yes. I'd be happy if I get into the college that I want. All those things may be good things, but that's not what we're talking about, right? That's subjective contentment. For me, a homemade ravioli, few things beat it. I would knock over a lady in a wheelchair to get to a plate of those things. Let me tell you, okay? That is not what we're talking about as subjective. That's subjective contentment. What we're talking about here is the true fulfillment of the human person. The true fulfillment of the human person. So in other words, you have meaning in your life. So if we hold on to justified true beliefs with moral certainty, and we realize there's evil in the world, we will not accept it even if it's in a pluralistic society and exists. The fruits of that are peace, the consolation of my heart and soul, hope, a future expectation and a possible good, and happiness, a fulfillment of the actual human person. It has different fruits. This then brings us to the culture of life. And I'll explain what that is. Let's define that as determining true values, and authentic needs, determining true values and authentic needs, leading to a respect for nature, and authentic needs leading to a respect for nature, and protection of God's work of creation. And protection of God's work of creation. So culture of life, we will define it as determining true values and authentic needs, leading to a respect for nature and a protection of God's work of creation. Now, there's a lot of words there, but let's look at that a second. What if I always tell the marriage prep courses, with divorce being rampant, we know if there's 30 couples, in 8 to 10 years, we know 8 of those couples are going to be divorced. It's tragic. I said, could you imagine if every single person I said in that particular class said in 25 years, we will still be married? Now, that's a revolution. Could you imagine if people did that? Could you imagine if every one of you, can you imagine if nobody in this room that gets married gets divorced? That's a revolution. It's not that hard, right? To change, but what do you have to do? You have to reorient yourself entirely. So look at this. It says, determining true values and authentic needs. So we're going to have to say that I can know things, certainly, and I'm going to have to look after what my needs are and put those before my wants. If you are married, the greatest need is for an expression of love with that person. That comes before any job. That comes before any, raise, moving, or whatever. I always have respect for the person who's offered a particular raise or offered a particular promotion, but he sees it being detrimental to the time he spends with his family, and he says, thank you very much, but I'm quite content. That is authentic, all right? Leading to a respect for nature. Now, I'm not talking about trees, plants, and rocks. I'm talking about the nature of things. What does it mean to be a human person? Can I respect the nature of other human persons and their own search for happiness? And I'm looking for true fulfillment. What genuinely fulfills the human person? Not what fills the time. We spend most of our time chasing out the stuff that is crap. We just don't admit it. It doesn't seem like it at the time. And you know this. You know growing up how many times you have wanted more than anything what you were asking for Christmas. And you knew if you would get that, how happy you would be. And when you opened it, your smile was ear to ear. And within weeks, it lost its meaning. Don't feel bad about it. Everybody has done that. But as we grow up, we have to stop doing it. But most people don't. They are guaranteed in their own mind that if they get this particular job or go to this particular school or get this particular kind of car or get this particular house or have kids that have this particular level of achievement, that will make them happy. It's not authentic, right? It's not authentic. And I'll share this with you, even though I'm on screen here. I have found personally one of the biggest learning curves to me was having children and not putting my expectations on them. My wife and I both said, like the 3 son-in-laws that we have, we couldn't imagine anybody better for each of our daughters. But tragically, we probably wouldn't have picked them. It has nothing to do with us liking or not liking them. It's what our expectations were. They were much better determining what was good for them than we were. So my wife said that. How well they chose. So my wife says, what I've always learned with our daughters is that our attempt was not to project what we thought was good for them, but to see what they saw in those people. And they chose well, right? That's a learning curve. But that only comes because you allow them to genuinely make that. It's difficult, nonetheless. So let me show you from the same document, Dedicate. They also talk about the way of life. First, love the one who formed you. Love your neighbor in the same way. It's all pretty straightforward. Don't do to others what you wouldn't do to yourself. Now here's the thing. Stay with me. We're not done yet. Okay? Even though it's something you don't write down, it's still something that has to sink in. If Christianity is not a struggle for you, you're not doing it well. If on some level you're not being ostracized for how you're trying to live your life, you're not doing that well. Use that as your standard, right? So ask yourself, if people curse you, talk about you, do you ask God to bless them? If you have enemies, will you pray for them each night? If people are persecuting you, I don't care if it's social media or wherever, would you fast for them? You expect a great reward for the people that love you because you love them? Don't the Gentiles conduct themselves accordingly? Let me finish with this. I may have already said this to you. A good friend of mine passed away this last fall, Chip, right? When I'm with my friends, I don't talk theology or philosophy. My wife has told me, you don't know how you come across. You come across like an encyclopedia. So I leave it alone. I literally don't say a word. I just sit there. So my 2 friends were both talking about their children, which are, 18 and up. And they said their biggest regret was that they never brought them to church. They said, we both grew up going to church, but we never brought our own children to church. And they both, and I'm just listening. They're sitting in my bar at my house. And they both said, if we had to do it all over again, we would have brought them to church as infants. But then they consoled each other. And they said, but you know what? We did teach them to be good. Yes, we did. We taught them to be good people. They said, Steve, isn't that the most important thing? But now they asked me. I said, no, it isn't. It's not even close. They said, what do you mean? I said, okay, a friend of ours, Casey, right? He's an atheist. He has 2 kids. They're wonderful kids. They're respectful. They're very learned. They're productive. They're kind. They're considerate. That's not Christianity. I said, what would be the difference between your child and an atheist? We connect to a person, right? So, in that regards, So anything, I know this is more like conceptual than anything. Any questions? No?